Hey, let's talk about this word stakeholders and what it is as it relates to business. Now, a stakeholder is people or organizations who basically are affected by the decisions that business makes. And there's a whole range of them. Let's go through a few. Maybe it might be best just to give you some examples. Employer associations. These are like not-for-profit voluntary organizations that people within certain industries may be involved in to help better the industry. Like maybe a taxi drivers association, for example, where volunteers get together to say, what are the issues, what are the things we can improve. So the decisions your business makes are going to influence that organization. Unions are also, I guess, in a way kind of like employer associations, but they're a bit different in that they basically are aimed at trying to improve pay conditions, provide legal protection potentially for people within certain industries. And once again, it's voluntary. You can join and usually pay a fee to be part of a union, have people represent you. So these kind of relate to the staff within your business, and they're stakeholders because the decisions you make within the business will affect the employees who are part of these organizations. Distributors, like if I was making a product, the people who take that product and distribute that out. So, if I made a decision that I was suddenly going to make a whole heap more of whatever my product is, well, I've got to distribute that somehow. So that decision is going to impact upon my distributors. Certainly, competitors are interested in the decisions I make because if I was to, I don't know, let's say let's look at McDonald's, for example, and their change in menu towards potentially healthy stuff. Now, that's a decision I've made within the business, if I was McDonald's, but that affects my competitors because if that's popular, then they're going to have to look at that and go, how do we respond? So certainly they are stakeholders. Financiers, think of things like banks, potentially, people who've loaned money to a business. They're going to be impacted by its decisions as well. The environment is a big part of this, a stakeholder. If your business does something that affects the environment in a positive or a negative way, certainly that has some impact on your local environment. Suppliers, the people who provide the materials and the inputs that your business needs to create its product or service, are definitely going to be impacted by your decisions. Once again, if you were to increase your production, because you've got a massive order, well, that's going to have a big impact on your suppliers who are going to need to supply the things that you need. Now, the community really very much impacted by a business, could be in a positive or a negative way, but a business is a member of the community. It has a role. We've talked about some of the roles earlier that businesses may play as part of a community. And consumers, which are the people who buy your products. Now, you'll see I've straddled these two, community and consumers, across the blue bit there, the stakeholders bit. We'll talk about that in a minute because this is to identify the difference between external and internal stakeholders. Now, you'll see all these other ones we've talked about so far have kind of been outside. They're people who are outside the business. But community, consumers, and employees and investors, I've put inside the box because these are internal stakeholders. So these are people within the business. So for example, employees, your staff within a business are going to be very much impacted by the decisions you make, maybe in pay rises or condition changes, but they are people within the business. So we call them internal stakeholders. Investors are people who've got money in the business. Now, different to financiers. Financiers are really only interested in you, say, paying back the loan, but an investor wants to see the company grow. If an investor puts money in, the more the company grows and the more profit it makes, the more the investors are going to get back. So they're very much internal stakeholders. And I've put community and consumers kind of overlapping because they can be both, because the people within the business are part of the community. They may also be consumers. If I was, let's say my business was, making cars, well then my staff are consumers of cars as well. So there's a little bit of overlap there, and hence I've put them sort of straddling both. So it's important for businesses to consider how their decisions are going to impact the stakeholders. So whenever they make a decision about how our business is going to operate or change or do something differently, sometimes it is very important to sit down and go, all right, well, how is this going to impact all the different stakeholders? Some of them will be positive impacts, some will be negative, which means sometimes they'll conflict with each other. So different stakeholders may have different objectives, or decisions that you make, some will be positive, some will be negative. So for example, if I was to, maybe find a cheaper way of washing my product down. Okay, now that might be great for the investors because suddenly now my profits are increased because we're doing a bit more cheaply, but the impact of that may not be as good for the environment. I may end up with more waste that I need to dispose of. So there's a conflicting stakeholders there. So the environment will have a negative impact, but the investors, it will be a positive one. Maybe something like, I don't know, if my instead of my employees, look, we're giving you guys extra shifts because we've got this busy time, and that might be great for them because there's some overtime pay. But for the distributors, that might put pressure on them because suddenly all this extra product has to get out into the marketplace. So you can see sometimes decisions will impact different stakeholders in different ways.